Oh, thank you. You're okay.
Popular place in trekking friends.
I heard you come far. Well, just from down. Wow.
Hi, I'm here primarily to protest our democratic rights to have an influence on the decisions which affect our daily lives. The fracking industry, which I don't believe is an accurate way of describing it because all the processes it uses for oil and gas extraction are in essence fracking, has been proven to be a contaminating industry both in the United States and in Australia. For reasons which are beyond my understanding, our government backs it when many European governments oppose it. So I'd like to live in a democracy where the right of people that live in an area exists for them to determine the environment in which they live. This shouldn't be centralised. There's no reason for it to be centralised. I'm also here because I'm concerned about the effect of the possible expansion of this industry in the Sussex Weald, which might irrevocably change the look, feel and community that I live in. I hope we manage to get this decision overturned today.
Do you want to just tell me your name and...
Elizabeth Williams.
And where are you from?
Lincolnshire.
Okay, so you've been involved with the Wrestle
very much,
site,
yes. Yeah.
And you've had some sort of fairly good news this week,
amazing news, yes, beyond our wildest dreams. The planning inspector upheld North Lincolnshire Council's refusal of a planning application to carry out something loosely like acid fracking. It was a bit of a frack and then acidisation at pressure into sandstone reserves. So complex and unconventional.
Yeah, there's a mention of a proppant squeeze as well, wasn't there?
Proppant squeeze is synonymous with fracking, really. It's just something that's it's an injection of chemicals delivered at pressure into the formation.
So you've been fighting this for some time now, haven't you? Because you had two refusals already.
18 months, yes, yeah.
How do you think it's going to go now? Because they've got until the 28th of April, haven't they?
To restore the site. Well, personally, I think Egdon Resources would be very foolish if they take it any further, because during the public inquiry, they were found to be at fault in so many ways. There was a catalogue of errors in their hydrogeology assessment and the mitigations that they were planning to put in place to protect groundwater, just a catalogue of errors and miscalculations, which all came out in the public inquiry. You wouldn't be able to read that in the inspector's report. You could only hear that in the live discussion.
I read on the sort of investor chat forums and things that they think that Egdon might try to reapply. They've got until, the 28th of April?
Yes.
They might try and go in and sort these things out and then make another application, being as they know what they were turned down on.
They may well do, but all the evidence that has come out during the public inquiry, they would just be foolish to keep pushing it, because there really is no way that they can guarantee safety of the groundwater unless they just don't do it. There's no way that they can that it can be a fail-safe operation, particularly now that we're finding the oil and gas companies are more and more self-regulating. The Environment Agency has even less capacity than it's ever had to closely and carefully monitor and manage oil and gas field onshore developments.
Do you think that the reason that this has happened is because these oil and gas companies try to cut corners and
absolutely
save on the expenses?
They're businesses. That's how businesses often run, and there's a kind of, what is it called, optimism bias, which I think was it Richard Thaler, who's the behaviour economist. he identified optimism bias, where it's a kind of risk blindness. They just push ahead to get the oil and gas, cutting corners, to make the profit, to please the shareholders. Optimism bias, yeah.
Well, a wonderful result for the people up there. I'm very, very pleased.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for giving us a few words of insight into what's happened there.
Desperately hoping that planning councillors up and down the country will feel empowered to take similar decisions across political divides, as it was in North Lincolnshire.
Thank you ever so much
Thank
indeed.
you. Thank you.
Chair and committee members, my name is Sue Taylor. I represent Balcombe Parish Council. This site is close to our village. The nearest house, Kent's Farm, is only 350 metres away, and the rest of the village a mere 800 metres. The southwesterly prevailing winds bring any noise and pollution directly onto our village. We oppose this development. We have many concerns, including water safety, air pollution, damage to the environment and the health of our residents, but in the time allowed I would like to focus on just 5 areas. Residents' opposition to the exploration of this type, the impact of the flare, especially when local topography and wind are considered, the routing of HGV traffic through the village and past our school. However, if this application is accepted, contrary to local people's wishes, we will need a robust noise management plan, particularly as in 2013 noise regularly exceeded permitted limits, and insurance or a bond to mitigate any liabilities. Firstly, village opposition. In 2013, a poll was conducted under the supervision of the Electoral Reform Society, which resulted in a simple majority opposing any oil exploration, whether or not it involved fracking, and a resolution that Balcombe Parish Council should always oppose it. We are elected by our residents and their views are of utmost importance. Secondly, the flare. The application provides limited information about the flare other than that it will be enclosed. We are concerned about the noise of the flare and particularly about its emissions. Without knowing the precise composition of the oil in the well, Cudrilla have not supplied that information, or the temperature and operation of the flare, we cannot know what toxins may be emitted. It may be possible that some may be highly toxic. Normally, the height of a flare would result in emissions being blown up and away, but here, with our village on the hill, the top of the flare is below the village. The prevailing wind will bring toxins directly into the village. We are not aware that the Environment Agency has approved the air dispersal document, which is a significant concern, and we would like to request that conditions are applied that require continuous monitoring of emissions from the flare, continuous monitoring of air quality at Kent's Farm and in the village, and that results are monitored daily by the Environment Agency and made publicly available. Our third point concerns traffic. We remind the committee that in 2014 they asked that the southern route be added. We request a condition that all hazardous materials and loads be obliged to access the site from the south and not to pass within 2 metres of our primary school. Fourthly, noise. In 2013, Cudrilla exceeded the permitted noise levels and did nothing until forced to do so. Conditions applied in 2014 obliged continuous noise monitoring, whereas the 2018 conditions proposed measurements only once a week. We request that monitoring should be continuous and that the results are submitted to the Council more regularly than weekly. And we would like to request that the suggested noise management plan is in place prior to any testing, so that the proposed mitigation measures are already in place. And lastly, financial coverage in case of damage. Should a disaster occur, or should there be any environmental damage arising from oil exploration at the site now or in the future, we would like the certainty that sufficient money is ring-fenced to meet all restoration costs. This is particularly pertinent since Cudrilla have reported net losses for the last 4 years. In summary, Balcombe Parish Council opposes this application, as do the majority of Balcombe residents. However, If permission is granted, we would then request continuous monitoring of flare emissions and air quality, continuous monitoring of noise and a robust noise management plan, mandatory access from the south for vehicles carrying hazardous materials, guarantees provided for possible or potential liabilities for at least 50 years, and finally, we request that the requirement for a liaison group, which was included in the 2014 conditions, be reinstated. We urge you to consider the impact of your decision on Balcombe and on the well-being of Balcombe residents.
Chairman, members of the Planning Committee, my name is Helen Savage. I speak on behalf of Frackley Balcombe Residents Association, but also from the perspective of a parent and teacher at the school who has lived in Balcombe for over a decade. I would like to make three main points about traffic, air quality and the operator. Firstly, we are very concerned about the increasing numbers of HGVs that will pass our school if this application is permitted. The B2036 is immediately above two areas used as open classrooms in front of the main school building. HGVs pass 2.1 metres from these outdoor classroom areas which are in daily use. The emissions from HGVs are various and none of them good for the health. If you could change the slide, please. Oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, are actually heavier than air and so will roll down from the road into this area where they will be trapped by the school building if it is a day with no wind within the courtyard. Particulate matter is so tiny that it is easily absorbed into the lungs. Its negative impact on health is well documented. Carbon monoxide is about the same weight as air, so floats about unless blown away by the wind. It combines with haemoglobin in the blood and prevents oxygen being transported to all our vital organs. The effects are cumulative. High doses of carbon monoxide can kill in under 5 minutes. So these are the kind of toxins that will be increased in the air where our children play, an area from which they do not quickly disperse, and I think on some days we'll be talking about up to 80 lorries going past. Children and older people are more susceptible to toxins of all kinds. If you grant this application, I ask you to ensure that HGVs will not pass the school at times when children are there. Apart from anything else, the fumes smell and it's hard to teach with the sound of multiple lorries rolling by. But it's not only the toxins from HGVs passing the school that concern us. The Cudrilla site lies below the centre of the village and the prevailing wind blows the pollution towards us. The flare will burn waste gases resulting from the flow testing, but RSK, Cudrilla's consultants, have concentrated on the NOx and carbon monoxide emissions produced from the flare. They failed to mention sulphur dioxide, which combines with water to form sulphurous acid, which is very irritating inhaled and which will be produced. If the flare burns at less than 100% efficiency, it is probable that highly toxic polyaromatic hydrocarbons and volatile organic and inorganic compounds will be produced. These will be carried on the prevailing wind up into the village and to the nursery school on Haynes Heath Road. There must be continual monitoring of the operation of the flare, not just occasional. Children are at higher risk than adults of developing both long and short-term health problems as a consequence of this pollution. Recent studies by health professionals in America have recommended a 1.6 kilometre setback from residents and schools for this kind of work to take place. Most of our village is within 1.6 kilometres and the school sits on the boundary. Even if we discount the hundreds of occasions when oil and gas companies have polluted aquifers in the US, this Balcombe site is too close to sources of drinking water for complacency. Cudrilla's site at Preston New Road in Lancashire has flooded. We cannot be sure that the same thing will not happen at Balcombe, with potentially disastrous consequences for our water supply. The Under-Secretary of State at Deborah has said of Preston New Road, the Environment Agency has raised concerns over the management of surface water on site and has asked the operator to address this as a matter of priority. In addition, the press quotes the Environment Agency as saying, contaminated surface water saturated the ground and flowed overland into a field drain which then discharged into a brook. We are trusting this company with two of the most precious commodities to life, clean air and clean water. Cudrilla will be trusted to self-regulate. Its mistakes are many and various, as this incident shows. Cudrilla is not a firm we can trust. I am an engineer's daughter, and if there's one thing my father taught me, it's Murphy's Law. What can go wrong, will go wrong. We should be taking the precautionary principle here, as this work is too close to both residents and water supplies for comfort. The children are the next generation of Balcombe, and as a parent and as a teacher, it is my duty to protect their health and well-being. As a voter, I rely on you to keep your part of the bargain you made with voters to safeguard our health and our safety and to protect us from the harmful aspects of life over which we have no control. I ask you to think hard about this as you decide whether to grant permission to this application or not, how you would feel if this work was so close to you. As you have probably seen in the last few days, Egdon Resources have been refused planning permission in North Lincolnshire to acidise a site, very similar to what Cudrilla is asking for here. The County Council turned them down twice, and on Thursday of last week, after an appeal from Egdon Resources, the planning inspector confirmed the County Council's decision. You can say no. And for the sake of my children, of all the children at the Balcombe School and Buttercup Barn Nursery, and of all the residents, old and young, of our lovely village, I ask you to reject this application.
So I'm sorry to say that now Councillor Bill Ackerman can't be here today, but he's emailed some of us emphasising key points, some of which have already been mentioned. First, he's concerned about the proximity of the site of the village, in particular the proposed flare. He is not satisfied that the noxious fumes will be minimal, nor even that the flare should be allowed in an area of outstanding natural beauty, and of course we agree. Second, he underlines the unproven assertions we are asked to rely on regarding groundwater pollution. We agree. Not only is Ardingly Reservoir itself close to the site, but two streams, one very close indeed, run into the Ouse, which is the source of our drinking water. Third, Bill also notes that many of the objections draw attention to the health problems, as mentioned by my colleague. I would also like to underline that the high-wheeled AONB is not only a superb area which we should be safeguarding for the future, but is an important magnet for tourism. The government's permission has changed since 2004 when this council permitted Cuadrilla's application. HMG has published its clean growth strategy. The PM has also said clean growth is not an option but a duty we owe to the next generation, and economic progress has to go hand in hand with greater protection of our forests and beaches, clean air and places of outstanding natural beauty. You therefore have to consider whether protection of the high-wheeled and other beautiful areas is less important than permitting a process which is the first step in producing yet more fossil fuels. Your responsibility is therefore a weighty one. The people, not only of Balcombe, but of West Sussex, will hold you responsible as their elected members, defenders of health and magnificent countryside. Instructions from the government have changed since 2004. Your decision on Cuadrilla applications should also change. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, I'm Matt Lambert from Cudrilla. I'm speaking today in support of our application for a temporary 2-year planning permission to flow test and monitor the pressure in the existing borehole at Lower Stumble before plugging the well with cement and fully restoring the site. The proposed operations are the same scope of works as the previous application granted by the committee in 2014 and do not involve hydraulic fracturing as the rock is already naturally fractured, as your officer has already commented. The purpose of the application is to establish whether there is potential for commercial extraction in the future. But should this be the case, that would be the subject of a further application for production. The principle of hydrocarbon exploration has already been established at Lower Stumble, and the Council's environmental impact screening opinion has concluded that the proposed development is unlikely to generate significant environmental effects. And this has been confirmed by an independent environmental consultant's report by ourselves. We regret that we were unable to undertake the activity permitted by the previous planning consent. This was due to the steep downturn in the oil market from mid-2014 onwards, which required the industry to adapt to new market conditions, and in particular significant retrenchment and loss of equipment and personnel in the industry at that time. and there were also significant changes to the environmental permitting requirements, which require additional assessment. We are, however, confident that we are now in a position to undertake the works within the period of the 2-year temporary planning permission we're seeking. Members of the committee, exploration for new domestic oil and gas resources is vitally important for the economic environmental reasons to reduce Britain's reliance on imports. Since the year 2000, the UK's production of energy from all sources has fallen by 57%. In 2015 alone, the UK spent 14 billion on net energy imports. Notwithstanding the growth in renewables and nuclear for electricity generation, the UK will continue to need gas and oil for many decades, particularly for heating and for transport. Now, I'd like to comment on some of the issues raised by consultees in their comments on the officer's report. In the first place, we've heard a lot about HGVs and traffic this morning already. A traffic management plan will minimise the impact of traffic on the highways, and significantly the restrictions on the HGVs passing the Church of England Primary School at Balcombe during drop-off and pick-up times. The traffic assessment shows the HGV movements will have negligible impact on the local highway network. And this is because the reality of this is that the average number of two-way movements of lorries past the site will be on average 2, and at the height, just for the 2 weeks of the flow test, would be 23 two-way movements. And I think it's important that the committee gets the traffic scale of the traffic into proper perspective. Now, the hydrochloric acid that will be used for the borehole preparation will be diluted to a concentrate of less than 10%, and in that form it's classed by the Environment Agency as non-hazardous to groundwater. And as your officer's report shows, that's because when the hydrochloric acid reaches the bottom of the well and interacts with rock and debris at the bottom, it turns effectively into salty water. And furthermore, the hydrochloric acid will be diluted before being transported to site. Now, the purpose of the flare, which we've also discussed this morning, it will be enclosed and will be only used for 7 days and only if natural gas is encountered. The independent air quality monitoring has shown that the emissions would be negligible. The noise issue can be managed, as your officer's report shows. Suggestions that Cudrilla should be required to take out special indemnities to cover the proposed work are really inappropriate. Planning guidance makes clear that restoration bonds should only be sought in exceptional circumstances, such as very long-term and novel projects, whereas our proposal is short-term and using standard techniques, and Cudrilla is in a financially stable condition. The work programme before you this morning will be robustly regulated by the Environment Agency and by other regulators. The site has been monitored for air and water quality and will continue to be so throughout the operation and beyond. An impermeable membrane will capture any liquid, including rainwater, which will be discharged safely under licence. The purpose of the membrane is, as I say, to capture any liquids. That is the same as our operated site in Lincolnshire, where there actually have been no major issues, just contrary to what you heard this morning. In conclusion, the proposed development is important in the context of energy security and has been assessed to have temporary and minimal impacts on the environment, will be conducted in a safe and responsible manner with robust regulatory oversight, and I would ask you to approve your officer's recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, start when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have lived in Balcombe for over 20 years. I have no interest to declare in either the applicant or the owners of Lower Stumble. Now, I need not tell this committee that every service provided by local and national government faces severe financial pressure. And that includes Balcombe School. At the same time, our nation is passing on to future generations a huge and ever-increasing national debt. In the circumstances, we should surely all welcome investment, which may contribute, even in a small way, to the national and local tax base, and in this case to our balance of payments and energy security. Now, when drilling last took place near Balcombe, there was absolutely no damage to the environment of the village or amenities. Had it not been for protesters few residents would have even noticed it. Not one household suffered anything like the disturbance many of us have to endure when our neighbours build extensions. Not one. Of course there were traffic problems because protesters were allowed to block the main road for hours on end. Researching experience elsewhere, I challenged the Drill and Drop website community to provide information on any damage to communities near UK drilling sites in the last 10 years, excluding the disruption caused by protesters. Apart from the usual abuse, not one example was offered. Nor did one speaker behind me quote an instance. Now, on the environment generally, as has been said, the fact is that however rapidly renewables advance, our nation will require some oil and gas for many years to come. The energy will be produced somewhere. We can boost foreign economies or support our own. In eliminating transport, local production is actually less polluting. Returning to Balcombe, much has been misleadingly claimed about the attitude of the local community. Now, I have not bussed in cheerleaders, but contrary to appearances, I'm not alone. When a much quoted poll was held in Balcombe, it is true that 536 voters, or just 35% of those eligible, opposed drilling. But there were 309 votes in support. Now you may think that those in support had considered and rejected the more outlandish warnings of earthquakes, self-igniting tap water, crashing property values, etc. But they, and many others, must have noted the overt threat that approval would bring back mobs of protesters. But these 300-odd voters nevertheless put their country's interests before their own personal convenience. I leave you to decide which votes deserve to carry the more weight. Provided the committee are satisfied with the proposed safety and monitoring procedures, I urge you to approve the application. But also, to address the genuine fears in the community by circulating clear and concise reasons for your approval and explaining provisions for safety and monitoring. Secondly, to ensure the police have the authority to keep protests truly peaceful and to prohibit any road blocking and interference with the legal activities of our farmers, the drillers, or the public at large. I know this is a big ask, but just as it's wrong that planning decisions be influenced either way by threats of disruption, it is also wrong that Balcombe residents should again suffer the unruly protests of recent years. And finally, please do what Balcombe Parish Council should be doing and appeal vigorously to the applicants and the landowners for meaningful donations to the community. Perhaps they could start with Balcombe School. In a word, Mr. Chairman. In a word, Mr. Chairman, put the economy for the many before the unfounded concerns of the few.
Cudrilla payroll.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jago. Our next speaker is George Crouch, who is also a local resident.
Mr. Chairman and Committee, ladies and gentlemen. The planning application is to grant temporary permission to test flow hydrocarbons from the well that is already bored at Balcombe at the Lower Stumble exploration site. This site, I understand, is to evaluate the likely volume and quality of the hydrocarbons. This test is essential. It will help Cudrilla, or the explorers, to decide if the well is likely to be profitable or lead to abandonment. I live in Balcombe, and not far from the wellhead. In a previous test conducted by the original explorers, they conducted a test, and apart from the light from the flame, it caused no problem to anyone in my household, which is 9 people. The noise level is minimal and the pollution, to my mind, was insignificant and will be insignificant. The oil industry is not over by any means and may not be over for many, many years to come. We know solar, wind and marine energy will come, but it will take a long time before we no longer require oil. And this is relative particularly to the aircraft industry, on which many local jobs depend. In quite a short time, it will lead to increased oil and gas imports, caused more likely by world pollution and the things that go with it. As it is, our transportation has huge problems, and further damage to our balance of payments, with which Brexit will cause major national problems. Also, which many people may overlook, when the oil and the gas is gone, they are gone, and the area can return to forest and birds and animals, or it can of course return to houses. This may only be about 25 years away, perhaps. This planning application, if granted, will lead to a test period and some development in that area. I support the application. I have no financial interest in Cudrilla or any involvement in any company to do with Cudrilla, and I have not been paid to come here to give my views in the application. One thing I will say is that this recent disaster in the China Sea does show that the oil industry is, from overseas, has got major problems, and there have been several before it, and the loss of life is very sad. I think that the committee should consider very carefully that Cudrilla should have the right to proceed with the application. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could switch your microphone. Thank you. Does any member of the committee wish to make any further contribution? If not, we will then move to a vote. No further contributions wish to be made. Okay, thank you. In which case we have a recommendation on page 14, which is that planning permission be granted subject to the conditions and informatives set out in Appendix 1 of this report. Those conditions are as amended by this committee with a new condition. Does any member of the committee wish to move that recommendation? Mrs. Johnson, you propose it. Thank you. And is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Johnson. So, all those in favour of the recommendation as set out, as amended, please show. That is unanimous. Therefore, there is no need for any further votes. Therefore, the recommendation as amended is carried. I'm going to have a small adjournment just for any members of the public who wish to leave can do so. We have some small items of the committee of business.
Okay, so Sue Taylor.
Yes, we're obviously very disappointed in the result today. I think it's very short-sighted. It isn't taking at all into account the fact that the flare will be below the level of the village, and therefore the toxins will blow right into the village and right towards our houses.
Did you think it was a foregone conclusion?
You should never say that. You should always go with an open mind and an open heart towards it. I'm just disappointed.
Thank you very much indeed. How do you feel about the decision to allow Cudrilla to come back?
I have to say I'm not surprised. I haven't seen council or the officers really consider the evidence and the effect that could have on their local residents. They have a duty of care and they've squandered that over oil and gas industry. They're more or less inviting them in despite all the data. And in particular, climate change. We should be leaving this stuff in the ground and not exploiting it. And interestingly, just last week, of renewables overtook all fossil fuels as a source of power in Britain. That speaks volumes. We are now becoming the dinosaur in this country. Of course, we started the Industrial Revolution. Everyone else is overtaking us, paying attention to renewable resources and not impacting on climate change.
Thank you.
It's all a bit of an anticlimax, I thought.
Well, it was no surprise to me or to any of us that West Sussex County Council Minerals Planning Committee has approved Cudrilla's application to flow test in Balcombe. It's a largely Tory council. They could be expected to vote along with the views of their masters in Westminster. Shame on the Labour member of that committee, however, Brian Quinn, who voted along with the Tory members. It's not Labour policy at national level to support this kind of activity. Shame on him. Shame on the Lib Dem guy as well, who voted along with it, asked some good questions, but then voted along with it. I mean, we expected this. I didn't expect it of Labour, I didn't expect it of the Lib Dems. I give up on the Conservatives. I mean, people in this area, it's a very highly conservative area. People vote tribally. People don't think about energy when they're voting at a general election or a local election. People just think about, of course they think about education and health, but actually what's going to put our planet down the drain of the universe is, at least as far as humans are concerned, is energy policy. And people really do need to think about energy policy. People need to think that this Balcombe well is just one of the first of many, that this kind of new kind of oil drilling, this is not conventional. This will lead to fracking eventually, even if it's not fracking, as Cudrilla says at this stage. This kind of drilling and stimulation of the geology of the Weald is going to lead to wells all across this region, all across the southeast. It's going to turn this area into an oil field. This affects everyone. It affects not just the people in Balcombe. It affects all those councillors who voted for it today. It could be coming to a field near you, near everyone who is watching this video.
Can I just ask you about the energy cooperative that you started after the last time that Cuadrilla was there? How's that going?
It's going well. It's been stymied a bit by government policy, current government policy of not supporting renewable energy. We have several arrays on roofs around the village and nearby villages. We had a very big project that actually got through. And we're glad it got through, but it didn't get through as a community project because of government policy. It's now a privately run enterprise, which is sad, but at least there is another field or two full of solar panels. Yeah, I mean, one of the great things for Balcombe that has come out of Cuadrilla's presence there is that solar cooperative. And one of the other things is that we found such good friends within the village. My social circle and my friend circle in the village has completely changed, and I've found such lovely friends through all of this. Well, this just illustrates the problem of the planning system in this country, which is really set up to support corporate businesses like Cudrilla, the oil and gas industry and others. It's set up to consider applications one by one, so planners are not allowed under planning law to consider the likely future implications of decisions that they make. They're only allowed to consider the application in front of them. So if someone applies to put a garage on a green field, they're not allowed to consider that 2 years down the line, that same person probably will apply to put a house beside it. It's a lack of logic, and it's unfair, and it's undemocratic. But that's how the planning system goes. And these planners are simply blinkered. They rely on the regulators, so they rely on the health and safety executive, who's supposed to be responsible for drilling the well, and they rely on the Environment Agency, who's supposed to be responsible for everything that goes on underground. But we've spent 6 years studying this, and we meet with the local Environment Agency, we meet with Environment Agency people in Westminster, and they don't know what they're doing as far as acidising is concerned, which is the process involved here. As far as acidising is concerned, the Environment Agency kept no records before 2013, and they really have been learning as they've gone along, and as we have raised issues with them, they have formed policy. It's absolutely ridiculous and unreasonable that the West Sussex County Council should rely on the competence of the Environment Agency and the Health and Safety Executive, who, in my opinion, are incompetent.
How do you feel about the remark that Jane Mosley made about the general public wouldn't understand the details, so therefore they wouldn't publish details of various things?
The details of the water contamination, potential water contamination, absolutely outrageous. I mean, I can guarantee that we, members of the public in that gallery, knew more about the water regime and the hydrology of that site and potential contamination than she does, and her planning officer, Chris Bartlett, does. I can really guarantee that.